Hello, friends. I am Sarah from Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting, and I am so truly glad that you are here. I want to invite you on a peaceful parenting journey that can truly transform not only the relationship that you have with the children in your life, but also your relationship to yourself as a parent or caregiver who wants to feel better about the relationships with those around you. You want to feel good at the end of the day. You want to go to sleep knowing you did your best, everybody feels good with one another, and you don't have to carry around any of that yucky stuff, the guilt, the shame, the regret that so many of us know all too well, wishing that we had simply more tools, more time, more energy, or more ways to connect better with those around us. So in this brief session, I am going to give you some tools that you can use right away, starting on day one, to help you foster more connection-based relationships with the children in your life so that you can have more joy at the end of the day. That's really what we all want. We want more joy. We want more peace. We want to just live life without, as I mentioned, any of that regret business, right? So this is our why. We want to raise children that don't need to recover from their childhoods. We want to feel that when they inevitably make a mistake in their lives, whether they are 4 years old, 14 years old, 24, 44, or 104, presuming we're still around when they're 104. Anyway, we want, whenever they make a mistake, we want to be the kind of adult that when somebody says, I'm going to call and tell your parent on you, where they have the gut feeling, the innate response, oh, thank goodness, my adult is going to know how to help me. I can't wait until they show up because I want to run to my parent or caregiver for support rather than fear them, rather than run away, rather than hide what I've done because I am concerned about the outcome. We don't want our children to be afraid of us. We want the kind of relationship that no matter how old they are, they feel safety in our presence. And guess what? When our children feel safety in our presence, there is naturally more connection, more cooperation, more of that joy that I've been talking about without any of the negative things that we sometimes experience when we parent in ways that are based on fear and based on all of the things that we are trying to shake free of, perhaps from our family of origin, perhaps from however society has conditioned us. We simply want to have easier, lighter, better relationships with those around us. So as we go through today's brief session, I'm going to give you some tools specific to 3 different areas of positive parenting that can make a really big difference starting right away. Now, I want to preface this by saying, I'm not here to fix your kid. If you're coming to me to say, how can I get my child to stop doing that thing? How can I get somebody else to behave in a way that I want them to behave? That's not exactly what this is for. What we want to do here is look inward and figure out what's our part of the relationship. What can we bring to the relationship with the children in our lives so that they want to cooperate, so that they want to be responsive when we call to them and ask things of them? What kind of mutually respectful relationship can we create based on who we are, rather than simply looking externally, trying to change things around us without doing any of the work that we need to do ourselves to make that possible in the first place? So the foundation for this is going to be threefold, as I mentioned. First of all, I'm going to talk about connection. Secondly, I'm going to talk about regulation. And thirdly, I will talk about play. So when we have these 3 things, connection, regulation, and play, we naturally have an easier, more joyful life. Well, what does this look for? And what are these things, by the way? So starting out, connection. This is simply my very basic way of talking about attachment. We want to feel emotionally safe with those around us. When we feel connected to one another, we feel like, hey, I get you and you get me, and we're good together. When a problem comes up, it is not you versus me in a traditional power struggle. It's you and me against the problem that we are trying to solve together. That's a major paradigm shift for a lot of us because we've been stuck in power struggles for too long. And guess what? They feel terrible, don't they? So when we are able to reframe problems as something that we together are working to solve rather than this combative relationship, we're already making a step that will help heal our relationship together. And all of this comes back to connection. Well, how can we connect with our children? And I'm going to be speaking in terms of our children as if we are parents. I realize that I have caregivers and educators, grandparents, all sorts of other people here. So please forgive my general use of the term parent. I mean everybody who takes care of children. So with that, how do we connect? Well, number one, it's about knowing the child in front of us. We might have several children in front of us, which can also be another topic for another day, and I will cover that, I assure you. However, we need for each of our children to feel that they matter based on their own individual differences and that we see and accept them for who they are. Now, many of us think, oh my goodness, either it tends to be one extreme or the other. Either my child is so much like me, I completely understand this child because it's the life that I live, or my child is so different from me. I don't understand at all where they're coming from. And it's really hard to parent that child because they're so foreign to me. It really doesn't make sense. Well, the heart of the matter is that neither one of these extremes is usually accurate. Yes, we might have a lot in common with our child, and yet there are still things that make them uniquely them, entirely separate from us. And likewise, over here, we might have the child who feels to us as if they are just some foreign entity plunked down on Earth by aliens, even if we happened to birth them. Somehow, this child ended up like nothing and nobody we have ever seen before, and it can feel really uncomfortable. Well, even that may not be entirely true because there's always some way that we can relate and we can connect, and our job there is to find common ground. So helping our children feel connected understands their individuality and their unique differences that make them unique. Well, Tina Payne Bryson and Daniel J. Siegel, two wonderful doctors who talk a lot about attachment, talk about the 4 S's of secure attachment. Children need to feel seen, soothed, safe, and secure. The 4 S's for them to have a secure attachment with us. And I'm talking specifically when I talk about this connection, the number 1 S, the seen. They need to feel like my big person gets me. Well, here are a couple of things that we can do to help our children feel seen rather than just lumped into this general category that is children. Children, first of all, always love one-on-one time. I realize this is a really, really tricky thing to do when we are on the clock, right? We need to get home from school or we need to be home from our activity. And for the adults, we might need to get home from work or from this, that, or the other thing. Plus, we need to eat. And some of us want to have a clean house. And we have other relationships we need to maintain. We have gotten so busy collectively as a society that we often fail to sit down and simply be with our child wherever they are on their life journey. What does this look like? Well, this is not necessarily parentally driven activities. You know, you might plan something fun. You might take your child out for special one-on-one time and say, this is all about us. I've planned this phenomenal day, found it on Pinterest, and it's perfect, right? Well, guess what? Most of us don't live in Pinterest world. Most of us live in this busy, hectic life where The very best thing we can do, and I don't mean that as in it's bare minimum, I mean literally the best thing we can do, the pinnacle of where we want to be, is simply figure out what's important to our child and spend some time doing that thing. For some of us, it might be, you know what? I have a child who loves to read. Me, myself, I get bored reading. I don't really like the children's books. I'm saying this for pretend I actually love reading, but maybe that's not my thing. But you know what? For my child, reading is their thing. So to help them feel seen, to help them feel connected, I am going to devote 10 minutes a day, whatever it is, 10 minutes a day to simply, it's real life here, my phone made a noise, 10 minutes a day to simply reading to them and showing up for them in a way that is meaningful. It might take the form of, and this one is a little bit more accurate for me personally, let's say we have a child who is really athletic. And you know what? I can't catch a ball if it hits me in the face. It's just not my thing. I'm not an athlete. I'm not going to be the one out throwing the frisbee and doing the thing. Well, maybe for me, spending time with my child to help them feel seen is, what can I do? You know what? They actually make frisbees now that are not the old hard plastic kind. They're perfectly soft and really easy to catch. No more jammed fingers. And by the way, if you want to know where one of those is, let me know. I have a link to them. That's what we use in our household. But maybe I can go outside with my child who enjoys physicality and throw that frisbee back and forth. I am speaking their language. And again, 10 minutes a day scientifically is shown to be enough. Now, 10 minutes a day, we might feel like, oh my goodness, I don't have 10 minutes. I'm already late for work. I'm already late for cooking. I'm already late for this, that, and the other thing. But almost invariably, especially if we prioritize it, we can create those 10 minutes. Maybe it means, you know what, I'm not going to turn on my phone first thing in the morning because I know I spend 10 minutes scrolling. Maybe I'll transfer that to reading time because I'm sure I'll make up the scrolling time later, right? Let's be real here. Maybe it's, you know what, somehow I find a way to do this other thing every single day. Maybe I can replace that with 10 minutes of throwing the frisbee around, whatever it is. Obviously, if you can do more than 10 minutes, that's fantastic. However, just so you know, scientifically speaking, 10 minutes per day is all it takes for a child to feel like, wow, my parents, my caregiver, my special person did something just for me. My nervous system then, as the child, gets the message, I matter to them. And because I'm little, I don't yet know whether I should matter in the world. I feel like I do. In fact, naturally, by design, I am wired to be egocentric and self-centric. That's how I have managed to stay alive evolutionarily throughout many generations. Children are designed to be egocentric and look out for themselves. But that wiring hasn't gone away. So when children feel from us that they matter, it validates their inner sense of self-worth, and they get to carry forward that message throughout their lives of, oh yes, I'm worth spending time with. I matter. I'm worth showing up for. Most children between the ages of 2 and 7 form their beliefs about themselves. In fact, all children do, for that matter. Between ages 2 and 7, they form their beliefs about themselves, whether they matter, whether they're good enough, whether they are kind people, whether they are this, that, or the other thing. The messages they have internalized, not only from what we've said, but also how we've acted toward them to show them whether they matter. These are the messages that form their sense of identity between ages 2 and 7, and they carry that forward forever throughout their entire life, unless they specifically do work or engage in activities to change that narrative. So, for example, here's some good news. If you yourself or your child has somehow received the message subconsciously during the time they were somewhere between 2 and 7 that they don't matter or they're not worth showing up for or whatever, it is never too late to heal. It is never too late to work with a support network that can help retrain the brain about our own limiting beliefs about ourselves. So hope is always possible. And I really want you to hear that message. So what do you do if you have multiple children? You do it when you can. You do those 10 minutes when you can. And it's important not to simply let the louder child who takes up more space emotionally always get their way, so to speak, as far as, well, your brother may like reading, but I guess he can read outside at the park while I'm actively playing with you because you need this activity, you need this thing, you need this thing, you need this thing, you need all this going on. It's really easy to default to the child who seems to require the noisier, the busier, the more active thing. We also need to remember that a child's quietness, a child's simple necessity of being with you, our child's innate need for calmness and stillness with you is every bit as valid and important to be validated as the child who is noisier about their demands and requests of you. So split that time when you can and make sure that you are helping children feel seen in the ways that matter to them. Some people talk about this as people's love languages. It's not always activities. I believe there are 5 love languages, and there is a book that somebody else wrote about the children's love languages. And I believe off the top of my head, they are physical touch. Some children really love hugs and kisses and snuggles on the couch and all of those things. Other kids, not so much. So we have to be aware of whether our love language matches theirs as well. Because if we're incompatible, then we'll need to make an even more conscious effort to speak in their love language as we are trying to show them they're connected with us. So physical touch is one, acts of service is another, where we do things for them. Some people, young and older, enjoy having things done for them. One of the love languages is quality time. You know what, mommy, daddy, caregiver, just spend time with me. Let's just do this thing. That's basically the analogy that I gave before about playing the Frisbee or reading the book. It's just quality time. We're going to do our thing together, whatever it may be. Some children enjoy words of affirmation. Now, this is different from praise. This is different from attaboy or good girl or whatever. That is empty and not necessarily beneficial to children. And I have separate articles about that very topic. However, if we simply say things like, it is so easy to love you. It's so easy to be around you. My goodness, it feels good to be with you. Those are words of affirmation that go straight to the child's soul and help them feel like I really matter to my special big person. So we've got words of affirmation, we've got physical touch, we've got quality time. Another one is gifts. Some children really like gifts, and some adults do too, for that matter. Now, does that mean that if our child's love language is gifts, that we need to go out and buy them presents every day? Absolutely not. But there are lots of little things we can do that essentially double as gifts and still check that box for the child. So for example, I might, after my child goes to bed tonight, I might write her a little love note. It might simply be, I love you and I'm proud of you. And I might wrap it up and put it on her chair at the breakfast table so that tomorrow morning when she goes downstairs, she has a fun little thing to unwrap. And by the way, it doesn't have to be wrapped. It's just an extra fun thing if you want to do it. But that one combines a gift, if you will, in this little love note along with words of affirmation. So you can absolutely combine these as well. And then last but not least, let's see, I did words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch. acts of service, and receiving gifts. So I guess that was all of them. Anyway, forgive me for checking my notes, but that's not my book. So I wanted to make sure that I had them all right for you here. Anyway, but helping our children feel this connection through their love languages, through whatever it is that helps them feel seen, ultimately helps them feel more connected to you. And that is one of the components of having a secure attachment to you, their caregiver, so that, like I said, when they are 4, when they're 14, 24, and so on up the line, they feel like, my special big person gets me. And when things go sideways or when there are things to celebrate, I know that I am safe to come to my adult and say, hey, I trust you, you're my person. So, we're all good together. All of that comes from connection. Next, I want to touch on regulation. Regulation basically is nervous system science, where every single thing we do is either co-regulating, or here's a term that I have coined, co-escalating. Now, many of us know from experience, I'll talk about co-escalating first. Okay, let's say our child does this thing. It triggers us. We yell, or we get upset, or we shame, or we go straight to punishment mode, or we do whatever it is our thing is. We do that to the child gets upset, so the child pushes back, and it turns into this big, nasty power struggle that feels like somebody wins and somebody loses. But at the end of the day, we both feel like we have lost because topic number 1, connection has been breached. We no longer feel connected because we have co-escalated and essentially exploded together. Now that, of course, is not conducive to our child feeling emotional safety with us and coming to us when things go sideways or when they want to celebrate something. This gets very, very tricky. So naturally, these are the moments when we as adults, we go to bed feeling like a jerk because we've had a hard day with our child and we yelled and we didn't want to, and we want to break these habits and what have you. So when we talk about co-regulating with our child, that's basically where I, as the adult, lead the way with my nervous system for my child so that when the thing happens, I don't freak out. I don't make things worse. Instead, I come in and say, you know what? We're going to figure this out together. Many of you have heard me say that I learned this particular phrase from an early childhood expert named Kelly Matthews. She learned it from her mentor, Deb Curtis, I believe it was. And it goes like this: don't get mad, get curious. When we get curious, when we pause, that gives us the opportunity to, number 1, regulate our nervous systems a little bit and get curious about which pieces of this picture might we be missing. It might look totally clear to us that if we walk in on our children and 1 minute a child is playing happily, seemingly not bothering anybody, and all of a sudden sibling comes in, bops him on the head, and all mayhem breaks loose, we might think we have the full picture. However, rather than swooping in with anger and all of the things I talked about, we can pause, we can get curious. Obviously, if we need to attend to an injury, we need to do that right away, but let's pretend that we don't need to do that. We get to pause and say, what else might be going on here? What might be happening for my child who instigated this offense? What might be going on in the big picture that I don't know about? And when we are curious about our children's experience, it is much easier to come in with compassion, to come in with empathy, and to slow down our nervous system. We actually have, here's a little bit of brain science for us. In the back of our brain, we have something called the amygdala. The amygdala is essentially our fight or flight center. It tells us when we need to freak out, not spend time slowing down thinking, and to simply react. So for example, if I'm driving down the street and all of a sudden I'm turning a corner and I see that a child is on a bike coming toward me, I don't stop to think about it. I simply slam on the brakes and go, oh my goodness, that could have been terrifying. And I then think about the potential consequences, but I don't stop to think about it ahead of time. Likewise, when I am driving along and I'm thinking about, you know what? I know from past experience that sometimes when I come around this corner, this child who lives up the block sometimes rides the bike up and down the street. So I need to slow down just in case bike riding is happening. That is the planning that I do up here in my prefrontal cortex. It's called prefrontal cortex because it's the very front of the head right up here. Well, when we are in a stress state, when we are acutely stressed, we have a few seconds before this part of the brain essentially tells this part of the brain to shut off and simply to respond. So, for example, if our default is when our child is misbehaving, when our child is acting out, if we typically get triggered and yell, we've essentially told our brain, I want to respond from here. I don't want to pause. I don't want to stop and get curious. I don't want to see if there might be more to the big picture than what's going on. But here's where our brain science works to our advantage. There is a time delay in between here and here. If when there is a stimulus, if when there is a trigger, we can tell our brain, hold on, don't respond so quickly, don't yell or don't do this or don't do that I typically do. Instead, take a breath, find a thing to do where you pause. Some people call it practicing the pause. When you slow down, you can think about, how do I want my child to see me handle this? How do I want to handle this? And when we simply take that breath, when we take that pause, we essentially tell this part of the brain, don't shut off this part of the brain. Give yourself time to think it through. Give yourself time to plan. Give yourself time to hold up a metaphorical mirror and say, who do I want to see as a parent right now? We can pretend that our child is looking at us through this mirror. What do they see? What do we want in this moment? When we regulate our nervous system in those few seconds where we have the opportunity to stop this message from overtaking our entire brain, we have incredible power to slow down and be the proverbial calm in our child's storm. Now, when our child is freaking out, it's really easy for us to freak out too. We do that naturally because of something called mirror neurons. You know how you've probably heard the expression, when mama's happy, nobody's happy. It's because we literally do pick up each other's emotions. We are biologically designed to do that. Likewise, when our child is freaking out, our natural reaction is going to be to freak out too. Flip the tables. When we are freaking out, our child's natural reaction is going to be to freak out as well. That's part of the co-escalating that I mentioned. When we pause, when we check in and get curious about what's going on, we set the stage for our ability to co-regulate and say, you know what, even though my child is freaking out, or even though I am tempted to freak out, I have the power and the ability right now to change the course of action and to keep it peaceful. What are, and you can come up with, in fact, right now, if you'd like to pause this video and write down 5 things you can do to calm yourself in the moment. If it's something like, I can go for a big nature walk, that's all well and good, but I'm looking for something you can do right this second without having to even put on your shoes. For some, here are a couple of ideas. And by the way, I have a whole separate video dedicated to staying peaceful in the moment, where I have lots of tips available to you, but a couple that come to mind are, first of all, we can do proprioceptive input. First of all, what that means is basically being aware of where our body is in space. We can do this a couple of ways. Number one, we can give ourselves a big bear hug. We're not going to hurt ourselves, but we can give ourselves a big bear hug and essentially have a little mantra that we repeat, something like, I am safe. When we do this, we literally tell our brains, I am safe, I am here, I am safe. And from there, we can say a quick prayer, we can say a meditation, we can do whatever works, whatever sort of affirmation we need. And you can write down a few different affirmations and practice them, see what works for you. So that when you're in the bear hug, you know what to say to yourself to get yourself to calm down. Now, be gentle with yourself. The last thing you need is big bear hug. Oh, I'm such a jerk of a parent. That helps nobody, right? Forgive yourself for things you've done in the past. We're talking about what can we do in this moment to regain our peace so that we can co-regulate with our child. It might be, I am safe. It might be, I am surrounded by love. It might be peace. It might be a single word. But whatever you do, also be aware of your breathing. When we are stressed, many of us hold our breath. This also triggers the amygdala that I mentioned because it tells us, I'm holding my breath because I need to save my energy because there's going to be a fight. There's probably a saber-toothed tiger coming my way. Well, this isn't a saber-toothed tiger. This might be a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old. It's not the same thing, even though our brain registers it as the same thing. It's literally the same biological response. But when we can pause and tell ourselves that we are safe in this moment, when we breathe, first of all, stop holding that breath. Let yourself start to breathe. When you breathe, you'll probably be breathing very shallow breaths from probably about here to here. It's better than nothing. However, what I want you to do is actually practice breathing into your belly. Do an inhale or approximately a count of 3 to 5 and do a nice slow count. Longer is better if you can do it. But here's the thing, make your exhale longer than your inhale. This relaxes something called the vagus nerve that tells our nervous system that we are in a state of safety. So practice with me as you're watching this right now. And the reason we practice when we're regulated is so that we essentially develop muscle memory, so that our body knows what patterns to do when we're dysregulated because we've practiced when we're regulated. Kind of like driver's ed. The first time I drive my car, it was not when I was driving down the street worrying about whether that kid's coming around the corner, right? I practiced when I was a lot younger, 100 years ago in driving school with my teacher in a parking lot, very, very safe place. We practice these things in safe environments so that when we are in the moment, they come more naturally. So right now, practice breathing with me. I want you to breathe into your belly, and sometimes it helps to have one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly so that you can feel your belly expand. So while I count, I'll do a brief version. I'll do a count of 4 in and a count of 6 out. So breathe in with me if you would into your belly. Breathe through the nose if you can. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, depending on our lung capacity and depending on our practice, we may need to adjust our numbers back and forth. But if you have done this with me right now, or if you do this on your own time, you literally lower your stress hormones in this exact moment. And the same is true for when you are triggered by a child. Here's another thing you can do while you're doing that hug. And if the hug isn't your thing, don't do the hug. This is about what works for you. But I'm going to do the hug because it helps me. Something else you can do that you have readily available Smile. If you're watching this right now, practice it with me. When you smile, it's essentially a magic trick for the brain. You trick the brain into thinking you're happier than you actually are. Why? Because here's the science of it. Our facial muscles send signals to our brains about our emotions. So when we smile, even if we're feeling like, oh, gritted teeth, this isn't the most natural smile in the world, we're still in the process of calming these muscles, sending chemicals to the brain that trigger a sense of inner safety. And as you've noticed, none of these things take very long. And again, I've got a whole separate video about staying peaceful in the moment if you want more tips. But there are all sorts of things you can do that take virtually no time, but that allow you the spaciousness and the graciousness to pause and co-regulate with your child rather than co-escalate. When you do these things, you will be more equipped to show up for your screaming, yelling, flailing child who normally would make you perhaps feel like, I can't handle this. They will help you be more empowered to handle it because you are creating a more solid foundation where it's harder to get ruffled. It's harder to get dysregulated if you are starting from a point of regulation. And again, because of those mirror neurons, because emotions literally are contagious to a certain degree, when you are calm, when you are peaceful, your child builds trust in your ability to help regulate them. You also then, through, here's one more brain science term, through something called neuroplasticity, you can create new neural pathways in your own brain so that these things that you're practicing right now actually become habit. And just like when you practice anything else, riding a bike, trying a new sport, trying a new skill, whatever it may be, it doesn't happen perfectly every single time you do it. Just because you have the head knowledge doesn't mean that those wires or those neurons are going to fire the correct way that you want them to every single time. It's going to take trial and error. So be gentle with yourself. When you make mistakes, when you yell that next time, when you co-escalate and realize in the moment you wish you weren't co-escalating, just remember you're learning. Don't give up. It takes a lot of practice to form new habits. What matters is that you keep trying. You can apologize when you make mistakes and say, here's what I'm doing to work on this. You can be very transparent with your children, but the more you practice, the more naturally these things will come. And I will be very transparent with you. You know what? I teach this stuff and I still have moments, especially if I'm tired, if I'm stressed, if I'm whatever, where I don't do this perfectly every time. So I don't expect you to do it perfectly every time. Nobody does. We're all real, all doing the best we can with the resources we have in any given moment. But when we understand how to regulate ourselves, we can then help our children regulate. So, final point number 3, play. When we are connected with our children, when we are regulated with our children, we can have more play. I've got totally separate videos dedicated to playful parenting, and I will have more play seminars coming up because play is not just about Barbies and Legos and toy trucks. It's actually very, very little to do with those things. Play is anything that brings us joy. And when we're with our children, it's anything that brings us mutual joy, ideally. Yes, going back to my earlier points in connection, you know what? Maybe reading isn't your thing. Maybe playing the frisbee isn't your thing. Maybe whatever. But when you have moments of joy together, that's play. Play might be as simple as, you know what? I'm making dinner. I'm feeling kind of grouchy. I'm going to get my wiggles on for a second because this feels silly to me. But because I'm moving my body in a way that feels unusual, I'm sending new signals through my brain about change patterns here. I'm doing something to lighten the mood. Playful parenting is a topic unto itself. But when we make a point to consciously create joy together with our children, to connect with them, to regulate with them, to play in their play language, which sometimes is going to be storytelling, sometimes it's going to be building things together, sometimes it's going to be gentle, fun, safe, rough housing, which, by the way, can be a great stress reliever for children. Even before bedtime, we can talk about that separately. But when you invest in play, doesn't mean you have to be funny, doesn't mean you have to be goofy, doesn't mean you need to do anything on Pinterest. Once again, no offense to Pinterest, but that's where the perfect parenting is. I'm here to talk to you about real parenting. So when we find ways to connect with our children through the language of play, keep in mind, as Jean Piaget said many, many years ago, play is the work of childhood. We can't expect that children's brains are going to work like ours do. Their prefrontal cortex doesn't even fully develop until it's approximately 25 years old. So with a child who doesn't seem to have any good planning skills, doesn't seem to understand the ramifications of their actions, doesn't seem to understand consequences, it's because that part of their brain isn't even working optimally yet. It's not built yet. But when we can connect through play, a child, for example, might have one of these pens on the floor, and we might look and think, tripping hazard, that could be really dangerous if somebody slips on it. If we say, pick the pen up off the floor, well, there's no play in that. Some children will pick the pen up off the floor, but if we can make the mundane fun, for example, let's pretend it's a young child. Hey, I see you left that truck. Still a pen. I see you left that truck on the floor. Can you please make it drive all the way over to the counter over here? Sure, little kid's going to get down and drive this pen, which in their fantasy world is a truck, going to drive it over to the counter. It's simply speaking in their language. Play doesn't end when kids grow out of little kidhood, though, however. Play is something that we need to be doing our whole entire lives, even, and dare I say, especially for adults who have started being so adulty and who seem to have lost our innate ability to play. Well, I have excellent news for you. You haven't lost it. You still know how to play. You simply need to figure out what kind of play brings joy to you, because when you feel joyful, you will offer all the more naturally a state of connection, a state of regulation to your family. And from there, families continue growing stronger together. And as I mentioned, cooperation happens more naturally, connection happens more naturally. Children want to do well in relationships with their special people because we are their special people. They want innately nothing more than to please us and to be with us. And if it feels like my child doesn't want that, all my child seems to want is to get under my skin and bother me and push my buttons and every other cliche I can think of, I want to tell you there's hope. I will show you how I can get you there. I will guide you through all sorts of ways that you can create emotional safety within your family, ways you can create connection that might have nothing to do with frisbees or Barbies or trucks or even reading stories. I'm here to help. I'm here to serve you. So I look forward to seeing you in my other mini courses. If there are specific ones that you are looking for that I don't already have, even though I think I have about 40 or so last time I checked, but if there are topics I haven't covered or haven't covered in as much detail as you want or nuance or whatever, let me know. I am here not for me, but for you. So my prayer and my hope for you is that you will find more peace on your parenting journey, and let me know what I can do to support you along the way. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you again soon.